That's a quick answer. That's the best we've had today. Now we can learn from that. Right, let us come to the urgent question. Let's let everybody move and clear. We'll see you, mate. I see you. Minister in a place. Deshrat Gardi.
To ask the Secretary of State for the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Affairs if he shall make a statement on the shocking revelations on the BBC by Professor Adrian Zenz that the internment camps in Xinjiang do exist and operate a shoot-to-kill Uyghur policy in contravention of the previous statements by the Government of the People's Republic of China.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today's reports provide further shocking details of China's gross human rights violations in Xinjiang. They add to an already extensive body of evidence from Chinese government documents, first-hand testimony, satellite imagery and visits by our own diplomats to the region. The report suggests a shoot-to-kill policy was in place at re-education camps for detainees seeking to escape. This is just one of many details that fatally undermine China's repeated assertions that these brutal places of detention were in fact vocational training centres or a legitimate response to concerns around extremism. On the contrary, the compelling evidence we see before us reveals the extraordinary scale of China's targeting of Uyghur Muslims and other ethnic minorities, including forced labour, severe restrictions on freedom of religion, the separation of parents from their children, forced birth control and mass incarceration. We have already taken a robust action in response. We have imposed sanctions, led joint statements at the UN, taken measures to tackle forced labour in supply chains, funded research to expose China's actions, and consistently raised our concerns with Beijing at the highest levels. The Prime Minister did so most recently in a phone call with President Xi on the 25th of March. In 2019, we were the first country to lead a joint statement on China's human rights record in Xinjiang at the UN. Our leadership has sustained pressure on China to change its behaviour. We've worked tirelessly to increase the number of countries speaking out. By October 2021, our efforts helped to secure the support of 43 countries for a joint statement on Xinjiang at the UN Third Committee, including Muslim-majority Turkey and Albania. In response to today's revelations, we will continue to work with our partners to raise the cost to China for its actions. And we will continue to develop our domestic policy response, including introducing further measures to tackle forced labour in UK supply chains. The UK stands with our international partners in calling out China's appalling persecution of Uyghur Muslims and other minorities. We remain committed to holding China to account.
Thank you. I welcome the Minister's statement, and she said so many things that will be so close to the evidence that was submitted to the independent inquiry that took place with Sir Geoffrey Nice QC, which determined that genocide is indeed taking place against the Uyghur. So I asked the Minister, what more evidence does she and the Department need to enable them to put in place their obligations under the Genocide Convention? Today's leak of the Xinjiang police files has over 2,000 photographs of individuals from the age of 15 to 73 incarcerated for just being born Uyghur or being born Muslim, which means if you don't drink alcohol or you don't smoke or you have a bed, you are incarcerated. One of the markers of genocide, Mr. Speaker, is breaking the link between parent and child. There are children in these re-education centres, and let's not forget the CCP's own words. They put them in these re-education centres to break their roots, break their lineage, break their connections and break their origin. That is a marker of genocide. I urge the Minister to call out what it is. It is the Uyghur genocide. The reason why this evidence was on the BBC this morning, because it coincides with a UN visit, the visit of Ms. Bachelet, who is the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. It's a rare visit, but unfortunately, the Chinese Communist Party have said that because of COVID, it's a closed-loop visit. It's in a bubble. So they will absolutely control who she sees and who she meets. Another example of the UN being bullied by the CCP. Does the Minister share my concerns that this UN visit and any report produced will deny the absolute truth what's happening against the Uyghur people, which is the genocide at the hands of the CCP?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I start by saying the Foreign Secretary made clear this morning that these latest reports provide further shocking details of China's gross human rights violations in Xinjiang, adding, as I said, to the already extensive body of evidence. I understand the strength of feeling in the House, and as members are aware, it is the long-standing policy of successive British governments that any judgment relating to genocide is a matter for a competent national or international court, rather than for governments or non-judicial bodies. And as my honourable friend mentioned, this coincides with the UNHCR visit of the High Commissioner, and we reiterate our long-standing call on the Chinese authorities to grant the High Commissioner or an unfettered access to the region so that she can conduct a thorough assessment of the facts on the ground. And we're watching her visit very, very closely.
We now come to Shadow Minister Catherine West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for Wealden for once more bringing the question of the appalling human rights situation in Xinjiang to this House. These latest revelations are horrendous, but sadly not surprising. The Uyghur minority in the west of China have been systematically stripped of what few civil liberties they had and subjected to treatment which this House has voted on and called genocide. We've known for some time that the situation in Xinjiang, so closely examined in by the BBC's John Sudworth, constitutes outrageous acts of human rights abuses, and we've dedicated considerable time in this House to urging further action from the government to hold the Chinese authorities to account, and today is no different. The leaked police files we're debating today shed further light on the treatment of the Uyghur people, with a reported shoot-to-kill policy for escapees from the camps and other securitisation measures, which expose the Chinese government's claims that they're just vocational training centres as materially false. The Minister will have heard the House today, so I'll ask some brief questions. Firstly, further to the meeting which the Foreign Secretary had with sanctioned UK parliamentarians, some of whom are in the House today, what progress is there on reforming the government policy on genocide in light of these disturbing findings? Secondly, what assessment has she made of the genuinely unfettered access that she believes Michelle Bachelet will have when she is in the region? Number 3, will the government be using the procurement bill and the modern slavery bill in this new session of Parliament to protect British consumers from complicity in the Uyghur genocide and support British businesses who genuinely want to do the right thing? What steps will the government take to ensure that the equipment used to carry out the repressive surveillance detailed in this leak is no longer used in government departments or public bodies in the UK? Does the government plan to impose any further sanction on entities and officials who have directed or carried out atrocities against the Uyghur, including those named and quoted in these documents? And finally, will the government provide support and refuge to Uyghur people fleeing this genocide, including those fleeing third-party countries in which they are at risk of detention and deportation back to China? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let's be really clear. Genocide is a crime, and like other crimes, whether it's occurred should be decided after consideration of all the evidence available in the context of a credible judicial process. I am aware that the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary met with parliamentarians sanctioned by China. The fact that this meeting took place is a demonstration of how seriously we take this issue. In terms of future policy areas, as I set out in my statement, we will continue to develop our domestic policy response including introducing further measures to tackle forced labour and UK supply chains. On the matter of the technology, it's a long-standing policy that we don't comment about the detail of those arrangements. And finally, in terms of sanctions, we have acted to hold to account senior officials and organisations responsible for egregious human rights violations taking place in Xinjiang. And we do keep all evidence and potential listings under close review, but it would not be appropriate to speculate who may be designated in the future.
Ian Duncan-Smith.
Mr. Speaker, can I congratulate my right honourable friend for gaining this UQ and for you, Mr. Speaker, for having the foresight to grant it. Can I say to my right honourable friend on the front bench here that this is really not good enough, in essence. We have been going on and on about this for some time. We still cannot decide whether or not this is a genocide. Alone amongst all of the developed nations, we are now stuck in a ludicrous definition. It's high time they did it. And I wonder if my honourable friend is aware of Elena Duhan, a UN human rights monitor, who was in receipt of $200,000 from China in 2021. This is never unheard of in the past, and meanwhile we have a UN High Representative going to China. What faith can we have? What faith can we have that the UN will not be used as apologists for China? And it's time we called them out and said, enough's enough, unless you get direct access, we will not listen to a single word you say. China is guilty of genocide.
Minister.
I thank my right honourable friend for his question. And I just want to kind of reiterate the point that the Foreign Secretary made clear that these latest reports provide shocking details. And as she also made clear in her statement this morning, in terms of the High Commissioner's visit, it's absolutely essential that the Chinese authorities grant unfettered access. And if such access is not forthcoming, all that will do is serve to highlight China's attempts to hide the truth of its actions in Xinjiang.
Well done. We now come to Chris Law, the SNP spokesperson.
Mr. Speaker, the Xinjiang police files provide some of the strongest evidence to date for a policy targeting almost any expression of Uyghur identity, culture or Islamic faith, and have a chain of command running all the way up to the Chinese leader Xi Jinping. This follows the Uyghur Tribunal, which concluded that there is proof beyond reasonable doubt that China is committing crimes of torture, crimes against humanity and the crime of genocide. We simply cannot collect more and more evidence of atrocities being committed. We must act, and we must act now. So what plans are there to impose sanctions on Chinese officials named today, including on Chen Guangzhou, who chillingly told senior military figures, and I quote, even 5 years re-education may not be enough. Let's remember he was responsible for many of the human rights abuses in the sovereign state of Tibet, which has been illegally occupied by China for some decades. In line with recommendations from the Foreign Affairs Committee, has the FCDO begun engaging in dialogue with the International Criminal Court about the feasibility of investigation into crimes committed against the Uyghurs in Xinjiang? Yes or no? And will the UK Government finally declare China is committing genocide against Uyghurs in Xinjiang?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've been clear in terms of the shocking details that have emerged today, which is already adding to the extensive body of evidence, and be very clear that we have been standing with international partners and calling out China's persecution of the Uyghur Muslims and other minorities, and we do remain committed to holding China to account. But I think it's important to also note that our policy on genocide determination doesn't prevent us from taking robust action, and we have done. And as I said in an earlier answer, in terms of future sanctions, we keep all evidence and potential listings under review, but it would not be appropriate to speculate.
Tim Lawton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is shocking new evidence. 250,000 Uyghurs detained, re-education camps, In one county, 12% of the adult population actually detained over a couple of years. Shoot-to-kill policies and everything we know about. This is genocide. What more evidence do we need that this is genocide? The Minister referred to the meeting that the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary had with those sanctioned members of Parliament last month, at which the Prime Minister expressed surprise that we seem to be out of kilter with other countries in the way we define genocide, and promised to look at this again and come back to us to see if we can reform the way the government defines genocide, in keeping with the unanimous vote of this House to recognise that genocide has happened. So can the Minister update us, particularly those of us who have been sanctioned, what progress is being made on that?
Minister.
I thank my right friend for his question, and as I say, that it is a long-standing policy of successive governments in terms of any judgment in terms of genocide. However, I do really understand the strength of feeling, and I am aware that he did meet with colleagues, the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary, and the fact that that meeting took place demonstrates how seriously the government takes this issue.
Abdul Khan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The chilling report that was leaked today shows China's bloodthirsty campaign against Uyghur Muslims is showing no sign of slowing down. Despite repeated calls, Mr. Speaker, the government has been far too slow to act. So will the Minister finally, and I ask again, commit to sanctioning the Chen Kuan-gu, the chief architect of the massacre we are witnessing in Xinjiang? And will the government use the procurement bill and the modern slavery bill to ensure British supply chains are not tainted with the Uyghur genocide?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have kind of mentioned in my earlier remarks, but the UK has taken robust action. You know, we've imposed sanctions, we've led joint statements at the UN, taken measures to tackle forced labour in supply chains. And as I mentioned, we will continue to look at policies in this area.
Alicia,
thank you, Mr. Speaker. The genocide of the Uyghur people has been taking place on an industrial scale for decades, and we shouldn't be unjust to victims by pretending that what we're hearing today is somehow new or not something we did not already know. And China is not being held to account. The UK is still shipping in products made from Uyghur blood labour. Canadian Solar plans to impose its solar panels on Rutland. Government is still contracting firms complicit in genocide such as Hikvision. Will my honourable friend please confirm that we will use the new procurement bill to end the ability of China to build their totalitarian state on the backs of British biometrics and data and the blood of the Uyghur people?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for her question. And I think, as I said earlier on, that what we have seen in this morning and the latest reports are truly shocking and actually do add to the volume of evidence that already exists. And we are taking strong action, but as I say, we will continue to develop our policy response and introduce further measures relating to both tackle forced labour in UK supply chains.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I express just how angry, disgusted, with a real deep abhorrence, with a pain in my heart that everybody else has as well, and I know you, Mr. Speaker, feel the very same, as China, at the very highest level, has the blood of innocents on their hands. Given the overwhelming evidence of the atrocities being committed in Xinjiang, which is apparent in the media today, will Her Majesty's Government and the Minister make an assessment of whether the actions of the Chinese Communist Party in Xinjiang constitute genocide or crimes against humanity? I think they do, Minister. Do you?
Minister.
So I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. And as I said, genocide is a crime, and like any other crimes, it should be decided after consideration of all the evidence, but by a competent national or international court. But let me be absolutely clear. You know, the latest reports are truly shocking, and the Foreign Secretary made that very clear in her statement this morning.
Sir Desmond Swayne.
Given the limitations and restrictions, she can't now have any confidence in the UN visit, can she?
Here.
Minister.
As the Foreign Secretary made very clear in her statement this morning, you know, if access is not forthcoming, the visit will only serve to highlight China's attempts to hide the truth and its actions. And we've been absolutely clear that unfettered access is essential.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are cases where a man has been jailed for almost 17 years because the Chinese state determined his beard to be illegal. Another case where someone has been jailed for having studied Islamic scriptures with his grandmother. And now we're made aware of reports that machine guns and snipers have been placed with orders to shoot to kill any of the almost 2 million, one of those who escaped those camps. What we see in Xinjiang is Muslims denied of their Muslimness and most grotesque and extreme versions of Islamophobia. Does the Minister agree with me that these latest revelations demonstrate the need for the British government to take action and sanction Chinese officials involved in the human rights abuses in Xinjiang?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, what we're seeing is truly shocking and adds to this body of evidence. And in terms of you know, the future sanctions, you know, we have been holding officials accountable. We have sanctioned senior officials and organisations. But we do keep all the evidence and potential listings under review. But I can't speculate about future sanctions.
Mr. Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I suspect that the Minister, in her answer to the Right Honourable Gentleman for Chingford, gave a more revealing answer than she had intended when she said that if there are to be restrictions in the UN party visiting the province, then that would achieve only one thing, and it would be to expose China as a country that disliked outside scrutiny. That would hardly be exposing something that is already a secret. And many of us would hope that it would have triggered something more substantial by way of meaningful action from the government. So to give her the opportunity to answer the question posed from the front bench and her honourable friend from the other side about Hike Vision. Hike Vision have installed or produced the equipment which is used for surveillance in Xinjiang. They now want access to our market. It would send a really powerful signal to say that if you provide equipment of that sort to a place like China, then you are not welcome in this country.
In terms of Hik Vision, we are deeply concerned by China's use of high-tech surveillance to disproportionately target the Uyghurs and other minorities in Xinjiang. And we regularly raise these concerns alongside our partners, including in a joint statement that we supported alongside 42 other countries at the UN. But, over the last year, we've introduced enhanced export controls, which have strengthened our ability to block exports of software and technology that might facilitate human rights violations.
Imran Hussain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today's reports provide further evidence, not that it's needed actually, but let us be really clear that tens of thousands of innocent Uyghur men, women and children are being tortured and killed in concentration camps as part of a continued genocide. And why? Because they dare to grow a beard. They dare to talk about their faith. They dare to practice their faith. They dare to be Muslim. Mr. Speaker, and all we see from the government, again, from the front benches, is words without any action. So the Minister and the government and the international community must accept that one of the issues here is that they continued inaction and they leave international Islamophobia unchallenged.
Yeah, what the reports have demonstrated is further shocking details, adding to further evidence. But we have taken robust action. We've imposed sanctions. We've led joint statements at the UN. We've taken measures to tackled forced labour and supply chains. And we also consistently raise our concerns with Beijing at the highest levels. As I said in my opening remarks, the Prime Minister did so in his recent phone call with President Xi. So we are taking action.
We now come to Murray Rimmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. During the past, we talk about internment camps for people who are peace-loving people who have a different faith than the Chinese. This is once again a communist government. The past months, there's been a rush for our government here to remove our dependency on Russian economy due to their invasion of Ukraine. It's now widely acknowledged that the government stated that it has started that process too late. The World Health Organization even said that the Chinese had an ethical organ removal and transplant system. It was based on the Chinese government's self-assessment, and that is accepted now. They've got everybody in their pockets, and including, it seems, over here. When is the government going to start the process of removing our dependency on the Chinese economy? If we leave it too late, it will be too hard to handle. Russia will be even harder than China will be even harder than Russian to tackle. Will you please get moving? What is happening now is not achieving anything. Please take proper action to get the action we need.
Minister.
I've set out on a number of occasions the actions we're taking, but I must, when it comes to trade with China, it's essential that it's reliable trade and avoid strategic dependency. And it does not involve the violation of intellectual property or forced technology transfer.
Geraint Davies.
We heard by way of example, Mr. Speaker, the case of a mother who's been interned and may be subject to shoot to kill on the grounds that she's associated with her own son, who in fact is imprisoned for 10 years on the grounds that he doesn't smoke and drink and therefore may have leanings towards religion. The Chinese government at the highest levels seems to have no respect for human rights, the rule of law and democracy, and is allowing genocide. And yet we are not taking proper action in terms of procurement, the modern slavery bill. We've got HS2, Hinkley Point, reliant on China. We're selling off our microchips, our universities that are impregnated. What are we doing in alliance with the United States and others to take a concerted economic approach to this, to actually stand up for our values and against genocide?
So, I've set out a number of the actions, but the actions, do include standing with our international partners in calling out China's persecution of the Uyghur Muslims and other minorities. And we remain committed in continuing to hold China to account.
Blair Anderson.
Mr. Speaker, I don't weep very often, but I did weep when I heard from a Uyghur survivor about the forced abortion policy and how that impacted her. It was horrendous evidence to hear. The Chinese government are simply not being held to account. There is no justice and there's no end in sight, despite all the measures being outlined. If this looks like a genocide, it is a genocide. If there is evidence that it is genocide, it is a genocide. If the Uyghur Tribunal, chaired by Sir Geoffrey Nice, QC, found that there is a genocide, that hundreds of thousands of Uyghurs are being subject to unconscionable cruelty, depravity and inhumanity, it is a genocide. What steps will the Minister take towards being able to declare this a genocide? What practical measures will she be taking now, and when will that be declared?
I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. And I think, I understand the strength of feeling in this House today. But as members are aware, it is the long-standing policy of successive British governments that any judgment in terms of genocide is a matter for a competent national or international court.
Robin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've seen before the careful, deliberate administration of abuse and persecution of minorities, and we know what this means and we know where this leads. I appreciate the Minister's difficulty today, and we've heard her say on several occasions that these matters are being kept under review. So can I ask her, will she commit to a review that she speaks of on the publication of the UN High Commissioner's for Human Rights report on the conclusion of their visit?
Minister.
So, as I kind of said earlier on, it is important that the High Commissioner, makes this visit. It's important that the Chinese authorities grant the High Commissioner full and unfettered access so that this review can be a thorough assessment of the facts on the ground. And we are following her visit very, very closely.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. John Sudworth's report on the BBC this morning was chilling, both in scale and in content. But I have to say, the Minister's response is woeful. The reality is she is the person with the power that could make the difference about this genocide in China. So what discussions has she had this morning with Chinese officials since the revelation of these papers, and what was the response?
Minister.
So I think I just want to make the point that, as I've said repeatedly, what we're seeing as this evidence is shocking. And actually the Foreign Secretary made it very, very clear that these were shocking details, adding to what's already a kind of an extensive body of evidence. But I want to reassure the House that ministers and civil servants in the FCDO and diplomats regularly raise this matter. And for instance, I've raised it with the Chinese ambassador to London in the past. The Foreign Secretary has raised it with her counterpart and the Prime Minister as well. So we regularly raise these issues.
Andrew Gwynne.
I refer to my register entry. Mr. Speaker, the latest reports from Xinjiang confirm what we already know, that appalling human rights abuses, genocide and crimes are happening to the Uyghur people. I want to return to the issue of security being used in this country, because the Minister can't just say that this is an issue of commercial nature or security considerations. She's the Minister. This security equipment and these companies are being used by the British government, their agencies and their public bodies. She can say today, we're not going to use them. Why doesn't she?
As we've said before, we take the security of our citizens, our systems and our establishments incredibly seriously, and we have a range of measures in place to scrutinise the integrity of our arrangements. But it is the long-standing policy that we don't comment on the details of those arrangements.
We now come to the next urgent question. I now call Tulip Siddiqui.